Ladies and gentlemen, please, meet David Sedaris.
That's so kind of you. My writing appears fairly regularly in an American magazine called The New Yorker. A few years back, they compiled a series of stories about winter, and this was my contribution, titled Let It Snow. In Binghamton, New York, winter meant snow. And though I was young when we left, I was able to recall great heaps of it and use that memory as evidence that North Carolina was, at best, a third-rate institution. What little snow there was would usually melt an hour or two after hitting the ground. Then there you'd be in your windbreaker and unconvincing mittens, forming a lumpy figure made mostly of mud. Snow Negroes, we called them. The winter I was in the 5th grade, we got lucky. Snow fell, and for the first time in years it accumulated. School was canceled, and 2 days later, we got lucky again. There were 8 inches on the ground, and rather than melting, it froze. On the 5th day of our vacation, my mother had a little breakdown. Our presence had disrupted the secret life she led while we were at school, and when she could no longer take it, she threw us out. It wasn't a gentle request, but something closer to an eviction. Get the hell out of my house. We reminded her that it was our house, too, and she opened the front door and shoved us into the carport. And stay out, she shouted. My sisters and I went down the hill and sledded with other children from the neighborhood. A few hours later, we returned home, surprised to find that the door was still locked. Oh, come on, we said. I rang the bell, and when no one answered, we went to the window and saw our mother in the kitchen, watching television. Normally, she waited until 5 o'clock to have a drink, but for the past few days, she'd been making an exception. Drinking didn't count if you followed a glass of wine with a cup of coffee, and so she had both a goblet and a mug positioned before her on the countertop. Hey, we yelled, open the door, it's us. We knocked on the pane, and without looking in our direction, she refilled her goblet and left the room. That bitch, my sister Lisa said. We pounded again and again, and when our mother failed to answer, we went around back and threw snowballs at her bedroom window. You are going to be in so much trouble when Dad gets home, we shouted. And in response, my mother pulled the drapes. Dusk approached, and as it grew colder, it occurred to us that we could possibly die. It happened, surely. Selfish mothers wanted the house to themselves, and their children were discovered years later, frozen like baby mastodons in blocks of ice. My sister Gretchen suggested that we call our father, but none of us knew his number, and he probably wouldn't have done anything anyway. He'd gone to work specifically to escape our mother, and between the weather and her mood, it could be hours or even days before he returned home. One of us should get hit by a car, I said. That would teach the both of them. I pictured Gretchen. Her life hanging by a thread as my parents paced the halls of Rex Hospital, wishing they had been more attentive, was really the perfect solution. With her out of the way, the rest of us would be more valuable and have a bit more room to spread out. Gretchen, go lie in the street. Make Amy do it, she said. Amy, in turn, pushed it off onto Tiffany, who was the youngest and had no concept of death. It's like sleeping, we told her. Only you get a canopy bed. Poor Tiffany. She'd do just about anything in return for a little affection. All you had to do was call her Tiff, and whatever you wanted was yours. Her allowance money, her dinner, the contents of her Easter basket. Her eagerness to please was absolute and naked. When we asked her to lie in the middle of the street, her only question was, where? We chose a quiet dip between two hills. a spot where drivers were almost required to skid out of control. She took her place, this 6-year-old in a butter-colored coat, and we gathered on the curb to watch. The first car to happen by belonged to a neighbor, a fellow Yankee who had outfitted his tires with chains and stopped a few feet from our sister's body. "Is that a person?" he asked. "Well, sort of," Lisa said. She explained that we'd been locked out of the house, and though the man appeared to accept this as a reasonable explanation, I'm pretty sure it was him who told on us. Another car passed, and then we saw our mother, this puffy figure awkwardly negotiating the crest of the hill. She did not own a pair of pants, and her legs were buried to the calves in snow. We wanted to send her home, to kick her out of nature just as she had kicked us out of the house. But it was hard to stay angry at someone that pitiful looking. "Are you wearing your loafers?" Lisa asked. And in response, our mother raised her bare foot. "I was wearing loafers," she said. "I mean, really, it was there a second ago." This was how things went. One moment she was locking us out of our own house, and the next we were rooting around in the snow, looking for her left shoe. "Oh, forget about it," she said. "It'll turn up in a few days." Gretchen fitted her cap over my mother's foot. Lisa secured it with her scarf, and surrounding her tightly on all sides, we made our way back home. Lately, I've been writing these fictional stories about animals, fables, I guess, and this is one of them called The Cat and the Baboon. The cat had a party to attend and went to the baboon to get herself groomed. "What kind of party?" the baboon asked. And she massaged the cat's neck in order to relax her, the way she did with all her customers. "Hope it's not that harvest dance down on the riverbank. My sister went last year and said she'd never seen such rowdiness. Said a fight broke out between two possums, and one gal, the wife of one of the other, got pushed onto a stump and knocked out 4 teeth. And they were pretty, too. None of this yellowness you find on most things that eat trash." The cat shuddered. "No," she said, "this is just a little get-together, a few friends, that type of thing." "Will there be food?" the baboon asked. "Something," the cat sighed. "I just don't know what." "Of course it's hard," the baboon said. "Everybody eating different things. You got one who likes leaves and another that can't stand the sight of them. Folks has gotten so picky nowadays, I just lay out some peanuts and figure they either eat them or they don't." "Now, I wouldn't like a peanut," the cat said. "Not at all." "Well, I guess you just have drinks then. The trick is knowing when to stop." "That's never been a problem for me," the cat boasted. "I drink until I'm full, and then I push myself away from the table. Always have." "Well, you got some sense then, not like some of them around here." The baboon picked a flea from the cat's head and stuck it gingerly between her teeth. "Take this wedding I went to last Saturday, I think it was. A couple of marsh rabbits got married. You probably heard about it." The cat nodded. "Now, I like a church service, but this was one of those write-your-own-vows sorts of things. Neither of them ever picked up a pen in their life, but all of a sudden they're poets, right? Like that's all it takes is being in love." "My husband and I wrote our own vows," the cat said defensively. "Sure you did, but you probably had something to say, not like these marsh rabbits, carrying on that their love was like a tender sapling or some damn thing, and all the while they had this squirrel off to the side, plucking at a harp, I think it was." "I had a harp player at my wedding," the cat said, "and it was lovely." "I bet it was, but you probably hired a professional. Someone who could really play. The squirrel, I don't think she'd taken a lesson in her life, just clawed at those strings, almost like she's mad at them." "Well, I'm sure she tried her best," the cat said. The baboon nodded and smiled, the way one must in the service industry. She'd planned to tell a story about a drunken marsh rabbit, the brother of the groom at last week's wedding, but there was no point in it now. Not with this client, anyway. Whatever she said, the cat disagreed with. and unless she found a patch of common ground, she was sure to lose her tip. "You know," she said, cleaning a scab off the cat's neck, "I hate dogs. Simply cannot stand them." "What makes you bring that up?" the cat asked. "Just thinking," the baboon told her. "Some kind of spaniel walked in yesterday asking for a shampoo, and I sent him packing. I said, I don't care how much money you have. I'm not making conversation with anyone who licks his own ass." And the moment she said it, she realized her mistake. "Now, what's wrong with that?" the cat said. "It's good to have a clean anus. Why, I lick mine at least 5 times a day." "And I admire you for it," the baboon said. "But you're not a dog." "Meaning, on a cat, it's classy," the baboon said. "There's a grace to it, but a dog, you know the way they hunker over, legs going every which way." "Well, yes," the cat said. "Suppose you have a point. Then they slobber and drool all over everything, and what they don't get wet, they chew to pieces." "That they do," the cat chuckled. And the baboon relaxed and searched her memory for a slanderous dog story. The collie, the German shepherd, the spaniel she claimed to have turned away. They were all good friends of hers and faithful clients. But what would it hurt to pretend otherwise and draw that fine line between licking ass and simply kissing it? This is a story inspired by my first trip to Australia, which is really far away. So this is called Keeping Up. My street in Paris is named for a surgeon who taught at the nearby medical school and discovered an abnormal skin condition, a contracture that causes the fingers to bend inward, eventually turning the hand into a full-time fist. It's short, this street, no more or less attractive than anything else in the area. Yet vacationing Americans are drawn here, compelled for some reason to stand beneath my office window and scream at one another. For some, the arguments are about language. A wife had made certain claims regarding her abilities. "I've been listening to tapes," she said, or perhaps, "All those Romance languages are pretty much alike, so what with my Spanish, we should be fine." But then people use slang or ask unexpected questions, and things begin to fall apart. "You're the one who claimed to speak French." I hear this all the time, and look out my window to see a couple standing toe to toe on the sidewalk. "Yeah," the woman will say, "at least I try." "Well, try harder, damn it. No one knows what the hell you're saying." Geographical arguments are the second most common. People notice that they've been on my street before, maybe half an hour ago, when they only thought they were tired and hungry and needed to find a bathroom. "For God's sake, Philip, would it kill you just to ask somebody?" I lay on my couch thinking, why don't you ask? How come Philip has to do it? But these things are often more complicated than they seem. Maybe Philip was here 20 years ago and has been claiming to know his way around. Maybe he's one of those who refused to hand over the map or refused to pull it out, lest he look like a tourist. The desire to pass is loaded territory and can lead to the ugliest sort of argument there is. "You want to be French, Mary Frances. That's your problem. But instead, you're just another American." I went to the window for that one. And saw a marriage disintegrate before my eyes. Poor Mary Frances in her beige beret. Back at the hotel, it had probably seemed like a good idea. But now it was ruined and ridiculous. A cheap felt pancake sliding off the back of her head. She'd done the little scarf thing, too, not caring that it was summer. It could have been worse, I thought. She could have been wearing one of those striped boaters shirts, but as it was pretty bad. A costume, really. Some vacationers raise the roof. They don't care who hears them. But Mary Frances spoke in a whisper. This, too, was seen as pretension and made her husband even angrier. Americans, he shouted, we don't live in France. We live in Virginia, Vienna, Virginia. Got it? I looked at this guy and knew for certain that if we'd met at a party, he'd claim to live in Washington, D.C. Ask for a street address and he'd look away, mumbling, well, just outside D.C. When fighting at home, an injured party can retreat to a separate part of the house or step into the backyard to shoot at cans. But outside my window, the options are limited to crying, sulking, or storming back to the hotel. Oh, for God's sake, I hear, can we please just try to have a good time? This is like ordering someone to find you attractive. And it doesn't work. I've tried it. Most of Hugh's and my travel arguments have to do with pace. I'm a fast walker, but he has longer legs and likes to maintain a good 20-foot lead. To the casual observer, he would appear to be running from me. Darting around corners, intentionally trying to lose himself. When asked about my latest vacation, the answer is always the same. In Bangkok, in Ljubljana, in Budapest and Bonn, what did I see? Hugh's back. Just briefly as he disappeared into a crowd. I'm convinced that before we go anywhere, he calls the Board of Tourism and asks what style and color of coat is most popular amongst the locals. If they say, for example, a navy windbreaker, he'll go with that. It's uncanny the way he blends in. When we're in an Asian city, I swear he actually makes himself shorter. I don't know how, but he does. There's a store in London that sells travel guides alongside novels that take place in this or that given country. The idea is that you'll read the guide for facts and read the novel for atmosphere. A nice thought, but the only book I'll ever need is Where's Wally? All my energy goes into keeping track of Hugh, and as a result, I don't get to enjoy anything. The last time this happened, we were in Australia, where I'd gone to attend a conference. Hugh had all the free time in the world, but mine was limited to 4 hours on a Saturday morning. There's a lot to do in Sydney, but first on my list was a visit to the Taronga Zoo, where I hoped to see a dingo. I never caught that Meryl Streep movie, and as a result, the creature was a complete mystery to me. Were someone to say, I left my window open and a dingo flew in, I would have believed it. And if they said, dingoes, our pond is completely overrun with them, I would have believed that as well. Two-legged, four-legged, finned or feathered, I simply had no idea, which was exciting, actually, a rarity in the age of the 24-hour Nature Channel. Hugh offered to draw me a picture, but having come this far, I wanted to extend my ignorance just a little bit longer, to stand before the cage or tank and see this thing for myself. It would be a glorious occasion, and I didn't want to spoil it at the 11th hour. I also didn't want to go alone, and this was where our problem started. Hugh had spent most of his week swimming and had dark circles beneath his eyes, twin impressions left by his goggles. When in the ocean, he goes out for hours, passing the lifeguard buoys and moving into international waters. It looks as though he's trying to swim home, which is embarrassing when you're the one left on shore with your hosts. He honestly does like it here, I said. Had it been raining, he might have willingly joined me, but as it was, Hugh had no interest in dingoes. It took a solid hour of whining to change his mind. But even then, his heart wasn't in it. Anyone could see that. We took the ferry to the zoo, and while on board, he stared longingly at the water and made little paddling motions with his hands. Every second wound him tighter, and when we landed, I literally had to run to keep up with him. The koalas were just a blur, as were the visitors who stood before them, posing for photos. "Can't we just," I wheezed, but Hugh was rounding the emus and couldn't hear me. He has the most extraordinary sense of direction I've ever seen in a mammal. Even in Venice, where the streets were seemingly designed by ants, he left the train station, looked once at a map, and led us straight to our hotel. An hour after checking in, he was giving directions to strangers. And by the time he left, he was suggesting shortcuts to gondoliers. Maybe he smelled the dingoes. Maybe he'd seen their pen from the window of the plane. But whatever his secret, he ran right to them. I caught up a minute later and bent from the waist to catch my breath. Then I covered my face, stood upright, and slowly parted my fingers, seeing first a fence, and then, behind it, a shallow moat filled with water. I saw some trees and a tail, and then I couldn't stand it anymore and dropped my hands. "Why, they look just like dogs," I said. "Are you sure we're in the right place?" Nobody answered, and I turned to find myself standing beside an embarrassed Japanese woman. "I'm sorry," I said. "I thought you were the person I'd brought halfway around the world. First class." A zoo is a good place to make a spectacle of yourself, as the people around you have creepier, more photogenic things to look at. A gorilla pleasures himself while eating a head of iceberg lettuce. And it's much more entertaining than the 50-something-year-old man who dashes around talking to himself. For me, that talk is always the same, a rehearsal of my farewell speech, because this time, buddy, it is over. I mean it. I imagine myself packing a suitcase, throwing stuff in without bothering to fold it. If you find yourself missing me, you might want to get a dog, an old fat one that can run to catch up and make that distant panting sound you've grown so accustomed to. Me, though, I am finished. I will walk out the door and never look back, never return his calls, never open his letters. The pots and pans, all the things that we acquired together, he can have them. That's how unfeeling I will be. Clean start, that's my motto. So what do I need with a shoebox full of photographs? Or the tan-colored belt he gave me for my 33rd birthday, back when we first met, and he did not yet understand that a belt is something you get from your aunt. And not your boyfriend. I don't care who made it. After that, though, he got pretty good in the gift-giving department. A lifelike mechanical hog covered in real pigskin. A professional microscope offered at the height of my arachnology phase. And best of all, a 17th century painting of a Dutch peasant changing a dirty diaper. Those things I would keep, and why not? I'd also take the desk he gave me and the fireplace mantle and, just on principle, the drafting table, which he clearly bought for himself and tried to pass off as a Christmas present. Now it seemed that I would be leaving in a van rather than on foot. But still, I was going to do it, so help me. I pictured myself pulling away from the front of our building, and then I remembered that I don't drive. Hugh would have to do that for me. And well, he should, after everything he'd put me through. Another problem was where this van might go. An apartment, obviously, but how would I get it? It's all I can do to open my mouth at the post office, so how am I going to talk to a real estate agent? The language aspect has nothing to do with it, as I'm no more likely to house hunt in New York than I am in Paris. When discussing sums over $60, I tend to sweat. Not just on my forehead, but all over. 5 minutes at the bank and my shirt is transparent. 10 minutes and I'm stuck to my seat. I lost 12 pounds getting the last apartment, and all I had to do was sign my name. Hugh handled the rest of it. On the bright side, I have money, though I'm not exactly sure how to get my hands on it. Bank statements arrive regularly, but I don't open anything that's not personally addressed or doesn't look like a free sample. Hugh takes care of all that, opening the icky mail and actually reading it. He knows when our insurance payments are due, when it's time to renew our visas, when the warranty on the washer is about to expire. I don't think we'll need to extend this, he'll say, knowing that if the machine stops working, he'll fix it himself, the way he fixes everything. But not me. If I lived alone and something broke, I'd just work around it. Use a paint bucket instead of a toilet. Buy an ice chest and turn the dead refrigerator into an armoire. Call a repairman? Never. Do it myself? That'll be the day. I've been around for over half a century, yet still I'm afraid of everything and everyone. A child sits beside me on a plane and I make conversation, thinking how stupid I must sound. The downstairs neighbors invite me to a party, and after claiming that I have a previous engagement, I spend the entire evening confined to my bed, afraid to walk around because they might hear my footsteps. I do not know how to turn up the heat, send an email, call the answering machine for my messages, or do anything even remotely creative with a chicken. Hugh takes care of all that, and when he's out of town, I eat like a wild animal. The meat's still pink with hair or feathers clinging to it. So is it any wonder that he runs from me? No matter how angry I get, it always comes down to this. I'm going to leave, and then what? Move in with my dad. 30 minutes of pure rage, and when I finally spot him, I realize that I've never been so happy to see anyone in my life. There you are, I say. And when he asks where I have been, I answer honestly and tell him I was lost.